How's it going, everybody? I still have one more video from DEF CON that I haven't published yet because of the Patreon stuff that I had to address. I did an interview with Amber Case about embeddable technology, wearable technology, and the ethics of biohacking. So she was a speaker at DEF CON, and there was a story about a company that is implanting chips in the hands of their employees. So I thought this was a particularly interesting conversation that I wanted to share with you. So it's from a few days ago, but I hope you enjoy it. How's it going, everybody? It is day 3 of DEF CON, and I explained this many times. The filming policies here are pretty strict, and people were tweeting that they were going to hunt down journalists who are taking wide shots because people don't want their faces shown. So behind us we have like nothing, and there's no B-roll because I can't film any of it. But I am here with Amber Case, who was a speaker here at DEF CON and is a cyborg anthropologist, and you were on a panel about the ethics of biohacking?
Yeah, that's correct.
So here's what I'm hoping. Can you give us a basic introduction into what biohacking is?
Sure. Well, biohacking is just taking control. Like, for instance, like if you lose a leg and you go to a doctor and they make you a prosthetic, they'll charge you a lot of money. Or you go and get a vaccine, you usually get charged a lot of money, or some sort of genetic treatment. Biohacking, in some cases, is taking that into your own hands. Literally, in some cases, like putting an RFID right here in this connective tissue, or putting a magnet in your fingertip surgically. Not going through a doctor, not going through any of these regulatory processes, and then seeing what happens. You can have extra powers of magnets in your hand, or you can make your own prosthetic leg, or you can make your own 3D printed braces or retainer, and like take your own medical history into your own hands. So the ethics of this is, two of the panelists, one on the left side was applying CRISPR gene editing to these dogs. He's basically not necessarily making designer dogs, like a lot of people have done over generations and generations, but he was saying, hey, there are certain breeds that are suspect to genetic issues. So what if I take the genes, the live genes, and edit them out? Just think of like a registry file in a computer, and kind of switch them off so that the dog no longer is susceptible to this disease. This becomes really interesting because he ended up emailing the FDA and saying, is this regulated? And of course, when you email the FDA and say, is this regulated? The FDA a couple weeks later says, oh yeah, it's regulated. They make up the regulation. So he's talking about that, and that not only the mother dog, but all of the offspring would then be regulated as drugs. And so each one of them would have a $100,000 a year kind of subscription model to these kind of FDA drug trials. They would be subject to these things, or they would be illegal. Because now the dogs are considered drugs.
But that's like licensing on life, you know what I mean? Like,
that's correct. I mean, it's like looking at Monsanto making all these genetically engineered seeds that also infect neighboring fields, and then suing those farmers for using genetic property of Monsanto, even though it's spread to those fields.
There's something you mentioned that I think is really topical right now, and you mentioned putting an RFID chip in your hand. Okay, so I guess I'm not the expert, but there was recently an article in USA Today about a company that right there, they would put an RFID chip in their hand so they could open doors and like buy food and stuff like that. We've seen stories like that over the years, and people are terrified. Like, we're going to be chipped.
Right. Well, there's a reason to be terrified. First off, if you implant these, it depends on how your body deals with it. Like, I would never get an implant because you can get microtumors on the insertion site. Plus, it's easy to put these things in. It's hard to take them out. The other issue is that why have an RFID in your hand when you can just have a ring with an RFID in it and you can just take the thing out? Like, if you're doing it yourself as an art project, or you're doing it because it's interesting, or you're doing it because you want to do a cool magic trick, or you want to just show that you can do this and it's neat, great. But if there's a society in which all of these things were regulated and you could never spoof your identity or never be anonymous, like, we would have different ways to spoof our identity and be anonymous. It would just suck to have this stupid chip in here all the time. And so I think that's that kind of like fear mark of the beast type thing of, this is the norm right now, and anything above that is kind of enhancing technologies that's not equally distributed. And then anything below that that restores you to the norm is perfectly acceptable, like, you know, glasses or contact lenses, wheelchairs and things like that. But anything above that level is like, oh, it's not completely understood and it's scary. I personally don't like the idea of like all these implants, because I don't want to have to go to the Apple store and get my implant removed and pay $50,000. I actually I was working for a health company, and I was on a plane to Nashville, Tennessee. I was sitting next to this guy speaking to him, and I said, so what do you do? And he says, well, I work for a pacemaker company. I said, great, well, those things work for like 20 years, right? He said, well, no, all of our new products are tested to work for about 5 years, so that we can get the $30,000 or $40,000 fee for the surgery and the re-implementation process. Plus, like, these new pacemakers, they've got like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and all these insecure things. So that the horrible thing about it was that not only was the technology not meant to last, but now you're subscribing to something that you don't own that's in your own body. So I had an employee once that had an insulin pump, and the insulin pump made a beep. And so the whole point of him having an insulin pump was that he could have this thing that automatically regulated his insulin. This would be fantastic. But he was in movie theaters, he was in shopping malls, he was at weddings, he was at funerals, and this thing would beep at him. And it would annoy other people. And then when he was at a really large concert, the beep would happen and he wouldn't be able to hear it. So he wouldn't be able to regulate his own insulin or put new insulin in. And so the whole thing that was supposed to restore him and give him more human freedom actually disengaged him from this reality and drew attention to it. And so I said, can you change the alert style? And he said, no. So a lot of these new things that you can implant, or a lot of like the quantified self technologies, for a while they were kind of open. You had APIs, you could take the data out, what was formerly invisible, and make it visible, and do something neat with it. You know, find out your genetic code and actually like figure out how to like hack that, or figure out like, oh, this is why I'm susceptible to sunburn, and like do something with that. Like, you had access to this. Now you're kind of buying yourself back, buying your data back. And so the big concern that I also have is that if you have something installed in you from somebody else that's controlled by somebody else, that's part of a company that might not even be around for 10 years because it's a startup, and you don't have access to that next level, that next year subscription costs, you're subscribing to your own life that you were supposed to give up some rights in a society to get other rights, right? So let's look at how things happened in the past. We had electrification efforts for electrical grids, and those things were really fantastic because everybody got electricity and it's pretty affordable because of the scale. We didn't get that with bandwidth. Not everybody has equal access to bandwidth, and the way we had electrification just doesn't scale in the same way. We have vaccines that most people are required to have, and we have penicillin, and we have all these different medical things. You wouldn't say like, hey, let's not vaccinate anybody for smallpox because we have a DRM on that thing and we can't do it. Like, what I'm concerned about is this extreme privatization of all these treatments means that, oh, well, I have $40,000 in my trust fund, and so my parents will pay to get rid of all my genetic anomalies and get all the implants that I want, or to change my facial expression, or get rid of these diseases, and there will be a whole subclass of people in this great genetic divide that don't have the ability or access or money to actually pay for these subscription services to the latest genetic things. And then you have like a whole bunch of biohackers, like negative biohackers, that are actually hacking this stuff all the time.
So there's a potential of a future where there is a literal genetic and cybernetic division between the classes.
I mean, we're looking into science fiction, but like, yeah. I mean, really, like in my cyborg anthropology class, we had to write some science fiction. I wrote a science fiction called Designer Genes, which was all about a bunch of kids having like the latest earlobes and like the latest nose shape that would happen year after year, you know. And if your parents didn't have enough money to get the new genetic mutation, then you weren't considered cool, right? It wasn't just like buying clothes, it was like getting the next genetic mutation in the line. And that was a really big issue because it just makes it even harder for people to have the norm, the standard of life that they would have. We're already seeing extreme privatization and control on all these systems, and it's actually going to make them more brittle because we need some fuzziness on the edges of reality so that we can do weird art stuff and do weird science stuff. And if we don't have that, and it's so tightly controlled that we can't even experiment with it, how are we going to have a one-size-fits-all thing, or we'll just have like some companies that aren't actually innovating? And that's not actually good for public health. So there are a lot of issues with this about like legality and patents and control, when in reality it's like, wait, if we could eliminate people having diabetes entirely, and yet only people with $100,000 can get that because it's controlled, because it's an expensive drug, we're already in that reality where like an EpiPen becomes very expensive. Like, we've already seen how crazy it can go out of control. There's no reason right now and in the future for this not to be the future, right? And what was it like in the past? Well, it was like, oh, well, cool. Well, we have public parks, We have Xerox PARC and Bell Labs that are going to make technologies that are used by everybody. We have, some guy innovating what's used in most microphone technologies. That wasn't like intensely patented and fought over and licensed as we had. And that's the really sad thing about this stuff, is that we might have these amazing cures and these amazing changes and these amazing, maybe even implants that like help you out instead of hinder you, but not everybody might be able to have them. And I think those are some of the cores of these concerns that people have.
I think maybe you kind of said this already, but one thing that I find interesting is that iPhones, for a while were kind of like a luxury, but now it's almost a necessity to have a portable internet device. And when we talk about like the RFIDs on people's hands, when we talk about insulin pumps or pacemakers, there might come a time where there's an implant. You don't own the technology, you don't own the software, but you have to have it to be normal. Like if you don't have a phone, right, you're kind of not normal in society. So,
and that's really why I brought up norms, is that each year, each season, the norm changes, and it becomes more and more expensive to have that norm to just fully function. I remember when I didn't have enough money to buy an iPhone. And yet I was working at this company where everybody pretty much needed to have an iPhone because meetings kept changing in the middle, and I had to run back to my computer. Like I was getting late for meetings, or I was like running around with my computer and looking really dumb, and it actually hindered my ability to do my job. And I remember saying, oh my God, I have to go buy an iPhone. And so I actually made an app that made enough ad revenue that I got $90 a month and I could get my phone. Because I was getting paid so little at the time. It was the Great Recession. I just graduated from college. I thought, wow, I have to go really beyond my means to do this thing, to kind of get a job that I could level up and make a little bit more to pay off my student debt. Why is that necessary? Like, why each year, now, you have a phone for 6 months or a year before it starts to turn against you and be really horrible. And I think that's the big problem with this stuff, is that our technology is no longer made to last a long time. Our technology, each time, it makes, there's more and more memory that you need, there's more and more processing power that you need, and you're getting kind of the same stuff. Like, you might get better graphics, but the bloat in the amount of code that has to be written, or the amount of code that gets written, is awful. And I want to see a time in which like those limitations are reached and people are sick of it. We say, no, the most efficient code wins, the smallest program wins, the smallest phone size, the smallest shape wins, because at some point these companies will get so complex they're basically building space shuttles where not one single person understands the entire iPhone anymore. I mean, after Steve Jobs died, the company went from Pangea, like with the central control, to like all this continental drift. Like, how can we keep a state of these complex components working together and not have the iPhone battery explode? I mean, at some point, like, these systems get so complex that we're afraid to update our operating systems because we know that it will still work, we just don't know which parts won't work entirely the way.
Let me tie this into the idea of a future where we have implants, right? The software becomes expensive, subscription fees. I'm thinking about this, and I'm going to paint a doomsday picture, and this will be my final thought. We can sort of wrap up after this, but what if, to be normal, you have to pay these fees? It becomes kind of like a social slavery, a technological slavery, where if you have an implant, right, let's say you have some kind of, to cure a disease, you have to work for this company, you have to pay this company, otherwise you die, you can't live, or you can't be normal. Will be beholden. I mean, even today, it's like, buy your smartphone or you're not normal, like I was just saying, but...
Or you have to be privileged enough or wealthy enough not to have to own a smartphone. I.e., you have physical people who are actually scheduling all your stuff for you that you talk with over the phone, and you don't have to have a smartphone. Like, the privilege of not having to check your email is something that a few people have, and it's not really equally distributed. So I think there's a lot of these stories. Like, I like to look at shows like Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, these kind of science fiction shows. Unfortunately, we have all this dystopic science fiction. We need more positive science fiction, first off, because we need a better way to do this stuff, and we need a better past and like a future to look forward to. A lot of this stuff was created because of Star Trek anyway. I mean, we basically have pads. But we also need to look at, like, if you look at Outer Limits, there was this episode on everybody had implants so they could access the web just through their brains. And this guy has a genetic issue where he can't have the implant, and so he goes in the restaurant and he can't actually read the menu, and somebody has to like read it off of their brain to him, and everybody makes fun of him. But then the network goes down and he's the only one that can like actually read books and has to train everybody else. And so the important thing to know, and it's the same with Star Trek, like the reason you have so many like diverse people on the bridge is when this shit happens, like Data's probably still going to be okay, or Worf, somebody's going to be able to not get taken out. They'll be able to save everybody else. So
I don't know how many people are going to get the Star Trek reference.
Well, you should look it up because it's important science fiction.
Great show.
But like if we're talking about the future, like it's really important to have like a bunch of different systems because you have resiliency. And so even if there are a bunch of implants, they're not going to all be the same implant. Some people are going to have better implants than others, and there's going to be so many annoying things that will go wrong. Like if people are already afraid about their houses getting hacked with these stupid smartphone technologies or smart home technologies, all the bandwidth going to your smart home devices and DDoS attacking like, you know, the DNS layer of the web, then yeah, well,
getting your brain hacked.
Yeah, pretty much. Blue screen of death. And there's another book on that which would be, I would suggest reading. It's young adult fiction. It's called Feed by M.T. Anderson. And it's, again, all about like somebody who can't get an implant in time, so they get a crappier implant, and social class issues, and what happens when like some hacker hacks into all these implants and like causes feedback loops in people. So
I guess last question to wrap it up. Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic or pessimistic for the future?
There's going to be pockets of great and pockets of crap, which is what happens with every technological revolution. Like the train brought us the ability and like, you know, trains got us to, you know, it was a great shrinking world, but it also made really loud noises, like cut through people's fields, and like was the end of like herd animals grazing across the plains. I mean, there's a lot of stupid stuff that's happened because of technology, and like the first fridges would routinely kill people with gas leaks, and then we got better fridges, you know. So in a way, like there's a bunch of stuff horrible that can happen, and there'll be a new norm. In a way, like I would never want to live in the past, just because like we know a little bit more about stuff right now. I think what we have to worry about is a mild dystopic future where we have a lot of really great stuff, but it's mildly dystopic, where we're put on pause as humans. And a lot of us are reduced to kind of robots, like rideshare drivers are basically robots at this point that you hire on demand and have no relationship with. And I'm worried about that because like the psychological like nihilism that we'll experience and like loneliness and disconnection is going to be a far more weird threat. And I'll just end it with this. There's a piece by Philip K. Dick that says, "I have no mouth, but I must scream," which I think really encapsulates the idea of having all of these systems that you work with that you have no way to get back to the programmers of those systems and actually get your problem resolved. And there are some unfinished corners of the software always because the systems are so complex that will never be fixable. And when your life is in their hands, those unresolved corners could kill you. Those unresolved corners could make you really upset. Those unresolved corners could postpone everything by 6 weeks, and you can't do anything about that. And so I think that I have no mouth but I must scream is really about like customer service in an automated world, or parts of your body aren't under your control. And I think we need to, as more automation happens, we need to equally work on customer service and not this one-size-fits-all culture. We need to also have a democratization of people making their own solutions and having their own data and doing their own healthcare so that they can create like a more resilient community that's, first off, more likely to solve certain illnesses because there are so many rare, weird complications that are going to happen in the future, and also have the ability to like fix and debug their own stuff. Because if you don't have that, then you're gonna have to wait 6 months in line in your, you know, in your extended consciousness mind upload system, or just a simple insulin pump to get what you want. We're already seeing microcosms of this. I just don't want the whole world to be like this. I don't want to have to pay an extra $1,000 a month for priority tech support.
On your heart.
On my heart.
Yeah.
Just because I happen to have a retirement fund and they know that I have money, right? You know, because I'm 80 years old, right?
Well, right on. Thanks for talking.
Yeah. Thanks.
Fascinating. I wish we could talk longer. I mean, so let me know what you think. Comment below. Was it worth it? Was it interesting? I think the conversation needs to be had because we are entering this future where, like I said in the beginning, a company has actually embedded, they're offering a chip to embed in your hand. And there's a lot of risks with that. So, you know, hopefully the conversation was enlightening. If you want to support the work that I do, you can go to timcast.com/donate. Give whatever you'd like. Give nothing at all. Videos will always be free and available every day at 4 p.m. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Timcast. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.